night guards, and people who carry too much responsibility to sleep soundly. The palace corridors were quiet, the way palaces always are at that hour, full of themselves, full of history, full of the particular silence that only stone walls this old can produce. The guards moved in their rotations, familiar patterns, familiar posts. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. That was what made it so hard to believe when everything came apart. The nursery wing of the palace sat at the far end of the east corridor, separated from the main residential quarters by two heavy doors and a short, carpeted hallway that absorbed sound the way thick fabric does. At night, the nursery felt sealed off from the rest of the world. Warm light under the door, the soft hum of a white noise machine, the particular stillness of a room where a small child sleeps. Senior Guard Thomas Hall had walked this corridor 400 times if he had walked it once. He knew every floorboard, every creak, every shadow that the wall sconces threw at a particular angle. He knew when something was wrong before he could explain why. That knowledge lived in his feet, in his shoulders, in the way his body moved differently when something in the environment had shifted by even a fraction of a degree. He stopped. The second heavy door, the one that should have been latched from the inside, was open. Not wide open, just enough. A thin slice of nursery light spilled into the hallway like something that had escaped. Hall's hand went to his radio before his brain had finished forming the thought. He did not go in. Protocol. You never go in alone. You call it in, you wait for confirmation, you do not compromise the scene by moving through it before backup arrives. 18 years of service had drilled this into him until it sat below instinct. He pressed himself to the wall beside the door frame and spoke low into the radio, voice flat and control because that was what he was trained to do. Nursery door is unsecured. East corridor. I need eyes on the room immediately. 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds were the longest of Thomas Hall's professional life. He would describe them later, in the quiet of a debrief room, as feeling like standing at the edge of something without being able to see the bottom. He couldn't hear anything from inside the room. That was the part that made his hands want to shake. Not a sound, not a cry, not the soft shift of a sleeping child turning over. Nothing. His earpiece crackled. Secondary on approach. Hold position. He held. When the secondary guard rounded the corner, Hall didn't waste time. They moved in together, controlled and fast, and pushed the door open fully, and the light from inside hit them both in the face, and they stopped. The room was not empty. A man was inside, standing near the window, not moving, not running, just standing there in the soft yellow light of the nursery, with the strange stillness of someone who had already made peace with being caught. He was not in uniform. He was not anyone who should have been there. And in his hands, in his actual hands, was something that made Hall's stomach drop straight through the floor. He was holding one of the child's toys, a small stuffed rabbit, pale gray fabric, one button eye slightly loose. He was holding it like he didn't know he was holding it, the way a person picks something up without thinking, fingers finding it in the dark. "Don't move," Hall said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. The man didn't move. Within 4 minutes, the East Wing was locked down. Within 6, William had been woken. William was not a man who showed panic. It was one of the things that had been trained into him from the time he was old enough to understand what it meant to carry public weight. Whatever he felt on the inside, the outside remained composed, measured, deliberate, the kind of calm that people in crisis need to see in a leader so that they can borrow it when they have none of their own. He had practiced this composure through events that would have broken a less prepared person. He had worn it like a second skin through grief, through scrutiny, through years of living with every movement documented and dissected. But when the words came through, nursery, intruder, child's room, something happened behind his eyes that none of the training could fully contain. It was fast, just a flicker, gone almost before it arrived. He was moving before the aide had finished speaking. The corridor felt longer than usual. It always does in those moments. Distance becomes elastic. He moved quickly, not quite running. Running means losing control of the situation before you reach it, but at the edge of it, that flat, efficient pace that says, I'm in charge of this. I am coming. Nothing bad has been allowed to happen yet because I have not arrived to confirm it. Two of his personal protection officers flanked him without a word. When he reached the east corridor, the scene was controlled but charged the way a room is charged after something has already gone wrong, and everyone is pretending to be calm about it. He saw Hall first, standing just outside the nursery door, and the look on Hall's face told him everything and nothing simultaneously because Hall was trained too, and his face gave up only what he chose to give. Sir, Hall stepped forward, spoke quietly, briefed him in 30 seconds. The open door, the figure inside, the toy, the lockdown. William listened without interrupting. The child, he said. 2 words. Safe, Hall said. The child was not disturbed, still asleep when we entered. Something in William's jaw moved. Just once. Who is he? We're working on identification. He's not speaking. He hasn't attempted to leave or resist. He's just Hall paused. Search for the word. Standing there. William looked at the nursery door. The slice of warm light underneath it. He thought, for 1/2 second, of every worst-case scenario he had ever been briefed on, all the risk assessments and security reviews and threat-level evaluations that lived in folders he was never supposed to have to open. I want to see him, he said. Sir, protocol. I'm aware of protocol. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. I want to see him. The man inside the nursery was younger than expected. Mid-30s, maybe. Ordinary looking in a way that made the situation more unsettling, not less. There was nothing about him that said threat, nothing that said unstable, nothing that fit the clean outline of what an intruder was supposed to look like. He had a face that you would forget in a crowd. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray jacket, and he was still holding the stuffed rabbit, fingers wrapped loosely around its midsection, and when William walked in, he looked up. They looked at each other. The room between them was small and warm and smelled of the particular smell of children's rooms, talcum powder, and something faintly sweet, and it was the most surreal space William had ever stood in because outside this door were guards and radios and a fully activated security response, and inside it was just a man holding a rabbit and a child asleep 6 feet away, chest rising and falling with the uncomplicated peace of the very young. Why are you here? William said. The man opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I just wanted to see, he said. His voice was flat, not aggressive, not apologetic, just flat, the way voices get when a person has decided not to perform anymore, when they're too far into something to bother with the theater of justification. William studied him for a long moment. The rabbit, the window, the sleeping child, the man's hands, which were not shaking. Put that down, William said, quietly, meaning the rabbit. The man looked at his hands as if he'd forgotten they were holding something. He set the rabbit on the nearest surface, the top of the toy chest, carefully, almost gently, smoothed one of its ears flat, and then he stood with his hands at his sides and waited. William turned to the officers behind him and gave a single nod. They moved in, professional, unhurried, and the man went with them without resistance, without a word, the way a person goes when they have already accepted the consequence of the thing they came to do. When the room was clear, William stood alone in the nursery for a moment. Just a moment. The white noise machine hummed. The light was warm and yellow and completely unbothered by everything that had just happened inside it. He walked to the crib, looked at the child. Small fists curled loose beside a round, sleeping face. Breathing slow, completely, entirely unaware. He stood there longer than he needed to. Outside, in the corridor, the debrief was already beginning. Reports were being filed. Questions were being asked about the door, about the patrol rotation, about where the gap had been, and how it had been missed, and how it would never be missed again. The machinery of response was grinding into gear, efficient and thorough. Inside the nursery, William reached down and straightened the rabbit on the toy chest, settled it back against the wall, made sure it was steady. Then he walked out and let the door close behind him and began the long process of finding out exactly how a stranger had gotten close enough to touch the things that mattered most. The answers, when they came, would be worse than anyone expected. And William was not done yet. Not even close. The morning after always looks deceptively normal. Light comes through the windows the same way it always does. Breakfast happens. People move through hallways, check their phones, pour their coffee. The palace staff arrived at their usual hours, took their usual posts, performed their usual routines. From the outside, looking in, it would have been impossible to tell that something had cracked the night before. That a stranger had stood in the warmth of a nursery light, holding a child's toy, while the child slept an arm's length away. But inside the walls, the atmosphere had changed. The way it changes after a near miss on a motorway, that delayed trembling that finds you 10 minutes later when the adrenaline finally lets go. The staff spoke in shorter sentences. The guards rotated with extra awareness in their shoulders. Everyone was performing calm with just a little too much effort. William noticed all of it. He had slept for perhaps 2 hours. Not in distress. He was not a man who collapsed under pressure, but because there was work to be done and his brain refused to suspend itself long enough to give him more than that. By 5 a.m, he was already in the Situation Room with the head of his protection detail, a woman named Diane Marsh who had spent 22 years in close protection and had the specific manner of someone who had seen almost everything and resented having to add this to the list. The preliminary report was in front of them on the table. The man's name was Colin Reeves. He was 37 years old. He lived alone in a flat in West London. He had no prior criminal record, no history of harassment, no known connection to any radical group or organized threat. He was by every measurable standard nobody, a person who existed in the gray middle of ordinary life, unremarkable in every direction, which made the question of how he had gotten inside the palace approximately 3 times more disturbing. Marsh walked William through it, the flat, unemotional way she always walked through things, because she understood that what he needed from her was information, not performance. The East Wing had a service entrance, she explained. It was used by maintenance personnel, laundry contractors, kitchen deliveries. It had a keypad and a secondary camera. The camera had been functioning. The keypad had been functioning. The records showed it had been opened at 11:42 the previous night using a valid access code. A valid access code. William set his pen down. Which contractor? He said. Marsh's expression didn't change. A linen service. 4-person team that's been cleared and vetted for 2 years. We pulled them all in this morning. 3 of them have confirmed alibis and clean phones. The 4th, she paused. Briefly. The 4th is not answering. His flat is empty. It appears he left sometime last night. William sat with that for a moment. Colin Reeves and this 4th person, he said. Connected? We're building that now. It's early, but the code came from somewhere, and Reeves didn't have the technical ability to pull it independently. Someone handed it to him. Which means Reeves wasn't the operation, William said. Reeves was the face. Marsh nodded once. That's what it looks like. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside the windows, London was starting to wake up, that first gray light of a February morning pressing against the glass. William looked at the photograph of Colin Reeves that was clipped to the top of the report. That ordinary face, the flat eyes. He thought about the way Reeves had looked at him in the nursery. Not defiant, not afraid, just settled. The look of a person who had done what they were sent to do. But what had he been sent to do? That was the part that didn't fit yet. Nothing had been taken. The child had not been touched. Reeves had not been armed. If the intention had been harm, it had not been executed. And if the intention had been something else, a message, a demonstration, a test of how close someone could get, then the message had been received with the clarity of a fist through a window. We can reach the things you love. William understood that kind of communication. He had been briefed on it more than once in his life. It was a particular kind of threat, the kind that doesn't need to say the words because the act itself says everything. I want every individual who has touched that service entrance code in the last 6 months, he said. Every name, every background, every association. And I want to know about the 4th person from the linen service within the hour. Marsh was already writing. By mid-morning, 2 things had happened. The first was that the story had started to leak. Not the full story. The Palace communications team was working hard to contain it, but The edges of it, the ambient rumor that something had occurred, that there had been an incident, that security had been activated overnight. London's press corps had a particular sensitivity to these vibrations. They could feel a story before they could prove it, the way old sailors read weather in their joints. 3 news desks had already made preliminary calls. 2 photographers had positioned themselves outside the main gates, which proved nothing and suggested everything. The communications team came to William with a recommendation. Say nothing, deny nothing, confirm nothing, let it die. He overruled them. We're getting ahead of it, he said. Controlled statement. Tonight, the communications director, a man named Paul Eddington, who had navigated every public crisis of the last decade with the anxious competence of someone defusing a bomb while also being filmed, went visibly pale. Sir, if we confirm there was an intrusion, if we confirm it, we control the narrative. If we don't, tomorrow morning they'll have a source, a photograph, and a front page that we had nothing to do with. William looked at him steadily. Draft the statement. We'll review it at 2. Eddington left looking like a man who had been handed a live grenade and told to juggle. The second thing that happened was that the 4th person from the linen service was found. Not by the police. Not by the palace security team. He was found because he used a debit card at a petrol station in Luton at 8:17 that morning, and the transaction pinged a flag that had been placed on his account 3 hours earlier. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 29. He had a sister in Manchester and a storage unit in Hackney and a set of encrypted messages on a phone he had left in the flat he vacated the night before, messages that the digital forensics team would spend the next several hours very carefully unpacking. Webb was picked up at the petrol station without incident. He did not run. He was sitting in his car, eating a packet of crisps when the officers approached, and he looked at them through the windscreen with the expression of someone who had known this was coming, but had hoped, against reason, that it might not. He said nothing on the way in, nothing during the first hour of questioning. He had the specific silence of a person who has been coached on exactly how long that silence needs to hold. Then his solicitor arrived, and 20 minutes after that, Webb began to talk. What he said changed everything. Not because it revealed a massive coordinated conspiracy. Not because it exposed a network of dozens. It was smaller than that. More personal. And in its smallness, it was somehow worse because vast organized threats are abstract. They are systems. They are movements. But this was a person. A specific person with a specific grievance. And a specific fixation that had been building for a long time in a very quiet way, until one night it came walking through a service entrance and stood in a nursery holding a stuffed rabbit. Webb had been approached 4 months earlier. Not dramatically, not in a parking garage with a manila envelope, but online, the way most things happen now, in the flat light of a screen, in the gray spaces of a chat platform, where everything looks ordinary until it isn't. A user whose details were already routing through 3 different anonymizing layers had made contact, had built a relationship slowly and carefully, had found the particular pressure point in Webb's life that made him susceptible. Debt. Significant, specific debt. The kind that makes people do the thing they know they shouldn't, because the alternative is losing something they can't afford to lose. He was offered money. He provided the access code. He believed, he said, that what was planned was surveillance. Photographs. Evidence of something. He claimed, with the practiced specificity of someone repeating a line they've had time to refine, that he had no idea anyone was going to physically enter the nursery. Whether that was true was something the investigators would spend a long time trying to determine. But the person behind the screen, the one who had built the approach, who had identified Webb, who had engineered the access, remained faceless. The encrypted messages were good. Not perfect, but good enough to make the forensics slow, methodical, frustrating work. William received the summary in the afternoon. He read it once. Set it down. Read it again. They're not done, he said to Marsh. It wasn't a question. No, she said. Almost certainly not. He thought about Colin Reeves in the nursery. The way he had set the rabbit down carefully, like he was putting something back where it belonged. Like he had been told to leave things exactly as he found them. Because this wasn't the end. This was the opening move. William stood up from the table. He walked to the window and looked out at the grounds, at the clean sweep of winter lawn, the bare trees, the gray February sky doing nothing in particular above it all. The palace looked exactly the same as it always had. Solid, unchanged, unbreachable to anyone looking at it from the outside. He knew better now. "I want a full structural review of every access point," he said, not turning from the window. "Every clearance level, every employee with interior access, every contractor, every delivery route. Everything. And I want it done under the assumption that whoever is behind this already knows our protocols. Because they do." Marsh made a note. "And the child?" she said. "Not operationally. As a person." William was quiet for a moment. "The child is fine," he said. "The child doesn't know anything happened." He said it like it was the most important fact in the room. Because it was. The statement went out that evening. Short, precise, confirmed the incident without confirming the details, expressed that the situation was under active investigation, and that all appropriate measures were being taken. It was the minimum possible version of the truth, which is what public statements in situations like this always are, the shape of the story with the actual story removed. The press did what the press does. The phones ran hot. The speculation filled 3 news cycles. People who had been nowhere near a palace, who knew nothing about what had actually happened, offered their analysis with great confidence on television programs that needed something to fill the hours. Inside the palace, it was much quieter. William ate dinner with the child that evening. Not a formal thing. Just the 2 of them in the small dining room off the nursery wing, the child eating with the total unself-consciousness of someone who has no concept that the world has been doing alarming things around them. There was pasta. There was milk in a blue cup. There was a conversation about whether ducks were better than geese that William engaged with his full attention. The child decided geese were better because they were louder. William said he thought that was a good reason. After dinner, he read the story. The same one he always read. He sat in the chair beside the bed and kept his voice even and calm, the same rhythm, the same pauses in the same places, because children know when the world is tilted, and they know it first in the voices of the people they trust most, and he was not going to be the thing that tilted it. When the child fell asleep, he sat for another few minutes in the dim room. The rabbit was on the shelf where it always sat, back in its place, completely unbothered. He looked at it for a long time. Then he went back to work, because whoever had sent Colin Reeves through that door was still out there. And they had made a choice that night to reach into the part of his life that he would burn everything else to protect. That was a significant miscalculation. They would find that out. There's a particular kind of patience that comes not from calm, but from purpose. It doesn't look like waiting. It looks like working. It looks like 6 a.m. briefings and late-night forensics reports and a man who keeps showing up to every meeting with the same controlled expression and the same unspoken message underneath it. I'm going to find you. Not loudly, not with fury, with the specific grinding patience of someone who has decided that the outcome is not negotiable and is willing to do whatever the process requires to reach it. That was the kind of patience William had. And in the 2 weeks after Colin Reeves walked out of the nursery in the custody of the palace security team, that patience was the thing that held everything together. The investigation moved on 2 tracks simultaneously, the way serious investigations always do when there are resources and, well, behind them. The first track was Marcus Webb. He had begun talking on day 2, and while his knowledge was limited, deliberately limited, William understood now, by whoever had recruited him, it was not nothing. He could describe the communication style. He could describe the nature of the requests. He could describe the thing that had been said to him that finally broke his resistance, that what was planned was harmless. A demonstration. Proof of proximity, nothing more. The access code, Webb repeated, was supposed to be used by someone who would photograph a window from the outside. Instead, someone had walked through the door. Whether Webb believed his own account was a question that lived in the gray space between guilt and self-preservation, and the investigators parked it there and moved on. What mattered was the digital trail, the encrypted channel, the layered anonymity, the person behind the screen. That person had made one mistake. A single technical error, the kind that sounds small when you describe it, but that forensic specialists live for a momentary slip in the routing chain, a split second where the anonymizing layer had stuttered, where the actual point of origin had left the faintest possible trace. Like a signature written in water, almost completely gone, but not completely. The team found it on day 9. They spent day 10 verifying it, day 11 running it through every available database, day 12 presenting William with a name and a photograph and a set of connections that suddenly made the pieces arrange themselves into a shape that was ugly and recognizable. The person behind the screen was not a stranger. His name was Gregory Farrell. He was 54 years old. He had spent a decade working in a security-adjacent role for a private organization with significant access to information about Palace protocols, staffing rotations, contractor relationships. He had left that role 3 years earlier under circumstances that had been described at the time as mutual agreement, which is the phrase that gets used when the circumstances are bad enough to require a buyout, and a non-disclosure agreement, and no public explanation. William had never met him, but he had known of him the way you know of people who exist at the edges of the infrastructure that holds your life together. Not personally, not directly, but as a name in a system, a role in a structure. What Farrell wanted was not immediately clear. There was no ransom note, no stated demand, no manifesto. What there was when investigators began pulling his digital life apart was a 3-year accumulation of obsession. Information collected and stored and cross-referenced, a detailed map of access points and vulnerability windows that he had built slowly, methodically, using the knowledge he had acquired during his years of legitimate work and sharpened in the years after, when whatever had been agreed upon in that quiet departure had clearly not resolved whatever was burning in him. What does he want? William asked Marsh when the summary landed in front of him. We think, she said carefully, that he wants to be taken seriously. William looked at her. 3 years of preparation, she said. Significant resources. A complex operation with multiple layers, multiple recruited participants. And what did it produce? One man in a nursery holding a toy. Nothing taken. No harm done. But, she paused. But, now you know he exists. Now you know what he can do. Now you know he can reach the thing you wouldn't let anyone touch. The room was very quiet. It's a resume, William said. Marsh nodded slowly. Or an ultimatum. We haven't found what comes next yet. But we know now that there is a next. The arrest of Gregory Farrell happened on a Thursday morning. Not dramatically. Not in a way that provided any of the satisfaction that arrests are supposed to provide in films, where the righteous conclusion arrives with music and weight and a sense that justice has a shape you can feel. In reality, Farrell was taken from his home in Berkshire by plainclothes officers at 7 a.m, while he was in the kitchen making toast. He answered the door in a dressing gown. He looked at the officers. He looked past them at the car on the street. He said, I expected it would be sooner, actually. That was all. He was charged with offenses relating to the unauthorized access of secure premises, conspiracy to breach security protocols, and offenses under the Computer Misuse Act. Colin Reeves was charged separately. Marcus Webb, in exchange for his cooperation, was offered a significantly reduced consideration, a decision that would generate a certain amount of controversy in the weeks that followed, because people have a strong feeling about the idea of cooperation being rewarded, a feeling that exists largely in the abstract and becomes considerably more complicated when you're the investigator who needs the information and the cooperation is the only thing that gives you enough to reach the person. Who actually matters? William was briefed on the charges on the same Thursday morning, an hour after the arrest. He listened to the full account. He did not comment on whether the charges were sufficient, because that was not his call to make, and he understood the line between his authority and the authority of the legal system clearly, and had no interest in blurring it. He asked one question. Is it over? Marsh did not answer immediately, which told him what he needed to know. We found no evidence of any remaining active participants, she said. We are confident that the operational network that facilitated the intrusion has been dismantled. Whether Farrell's motivations die with his arrest, she stopped. Chose her words. People like Farrell sometimes have followers. People who attach to the idea of what was attempted, even if they didn't participate in it. We'll be monitoring. Indefinitely, William said. Indefinitely, she confirmed. He sat with that. The particular weight of a threat that doesn't fully end, that gets managed rather than resolved, that lives on the other side of a locked door that you have to keep checking. He had known, in an intellectual way, that this was the reality of the life he had been born into. He had been briefed on it, prepared for it, had signed his understanding of it in everything from the protocol reviews to the late-night conversations with his protection team. He had lived with it the way you live with a low-grade sound that's always there. You stop hearing it as a separate thing. It just becomes part of the background. But the nursery had made it not abstract anymore. The nursery had put a warm yellow light on it, and a gray stuffed rabbit, and a sleeping child who didn't know any of it was happening. That was the thing that couldn't be trained away. 3 days after the arrest, William made a decision that surprised his team. He requested a face-to-face meeting with Colin Reeves. Not Farrell. Reeves, the one who had actually stood in the room. The one who had held the rabbit. His legal team advised against it. His communications team advised against it. Marsh, who advised against almost nothing on the basis that almost nothing was her call to make, said that it was his prerogative and that she would ensure it happened under appropriate conditions if that was what he wanted. It was what he wanted. The meeting took place in a room at the detention facility. Reeves looked different in daylight, in a different context, smaller, somehow, more ordinary than ordinary, a man who seemed slightly surprised to still be existing in the world at all. He sat across the table with his hands folded on the surface, and his solicitor beside him, and he looked at William with the same flat, settled expression he'd worn in the nursery. William had not prepared remarks. He had thought about this, and had decided that prepared remarks would be the wrong instrument for whatever this was. So he said the thing he had actually wanted to say. I want to understand why you agreed to it. Reeves was quiet for a moment. His solicitor began to lean forward, and Reeves stopped him with a small movement of his hand. Money, first, Reeves said. Then, I don't know. It seemed possible, like something that could actually happen. And then it did happen, and I was in the room, and I thought, he stopped. Looked at his hands. I thought, someone's going to be very scared when they find out about this. And that felt important to the person who sent me there. Like that was the point. Making someone scared. Were you? William said. Reeves looked up. Scared? Yes. A long pause. When you walked in, Reeves said. Yes. You were. You were not what I expected. William didn't ask what he had expected. He already knew the answer, because people in situations like this always expected either the symbol, the title, the distance, the institutional weight, or they expected fear. They expected to be the one who had the power in the room, because they were the one who had done the impossible thing, the one who had gotten inside. They did not expect a man who walked into a room his child slept in and looked at you like he was going to figure out every single thing about you, quietly, without rushing, and then deal with it. I have a daughter, Reeves said. It came out sideways like something that had been sitting in his chest and found an exit. She's 4. William looked at him. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. The fact of it sat between them in the room. The fact that Reeves had done this and had a 4-year-old daughter and had agreed to stand in a stranger's child's room in the dark because someone had offered him money and an ideology and a sense of possible. And the fact that none of that canceled any other fact, and all of it was true simultaneously. And that was the part of human beings that never got easier. The part that stayed complicated no matter how clean you try to make the narrative. William stood up. He looked at Reeves for a long moment. I hope, he said, that your daughter grows up in circumstances where no one ever stands in a room she sleeps in without being invited. He left. In the months that followed, the security review produced 47 specific changes to Palace Protocol. Contractor clearance timelines were extended. The service entrance at the East Wing received a secondary biometric layer. Camera blind spots, 4 of them had been identified, were eliminated. The entire digital infrastructure governing access codes was rebuilt from a different foundation. Thomas Hall, the guard who had first found the door open and had held his position and called it in exactly according to protocol, received a formal commendation. He kept it in the drawer of his desk in the security office, under a pile of shift rosters, which is where he would have put it regardless, because Hall was not a person who displayed things. The legal cases proceeded through the system with the slow, grinding thoroughness that legal cases require. Farrell's was the most complex, the most layered, the one that required the most careful assembly of evidence because his distance from the physical act of intrusion was his first and most effective line of defense. It took time, the right kind of time, the kind that prosecutors spend building something that can't be taken apart. It held. William was not present for the sentencing. He didn't need to be. The outcome was what it was, and the outcome was not the point. The outcome was the end of one specific story, but the understanding that he had carried since the morning of the debrief, the understanding that there is no final resolution, only ongoing management, ongoing vigilance, ongoing work that hadn't changed and wasn't going to. He visited the nursery on the evening after the sentencing was announced. Not for any particular reason. The child was at a friend's house. The room was empty and quiet, the white noise machine off for once, the stillness of it complete. He stood in the middle of the room for a moment. The rabbit was on its shelf. It had been there every day since that night. The loose button, I caught the light at a particular angle and gave it a slightly crooked, lopsided look, the kind that makes a child's toy feel more beloved than pristine ones do, because the wear is evidence of being carried and held and needed. He thought about what Marsh had said. People like Farrell sometimes have followers. He thought about the 47 protocol changes, the biometric layer, the rebuilt infrastructure, the ongoing monitoring. He thought about all the work that had been done and all the work that would never fully stop needing to be done. He thought about a 4-year-old girl somewhere who would one day be old enough to understand what her father had done. He hoped she would be surrounded by people who could hold that truth and still love her anyway. Because children are not their parents' choices. They are just children. They wake up and eat breakfast and decide with great seriousness whether ducks or geese are better. And they don't know yet that the world is complicated and full of people who make decisions in the dark that ripple outward into other people's light. He picked up the rabbit, turned it over in his hands, set back down carefully. There was nothing dramatic in this. No music, no particular sense of resolution. The room was just a room, and the rabbit was just a rabbit, and outside the palace, London was doing what London does, moving, breathing, generating its constant indifferent noise without regard for any one story inside any one building. But the door had been found open, and it had been closed, and the person who had found it had made every call exactly right in the 30 seconds that mattered most. And the child had slept through the whole thing. Had not known, had not been frightened, had woken up the next morning and asked for porridge and had an opinion about geese. There was no better outcome than that. There is no victory that looked like more than that. In the specific kind of life where the best thing that happens on the worst night is that the people you love most don't know how close it got. William turned off the light in the nursery and went back to work. Because that is what you do. You check the door. You find a gap. You close it. You sit with your child and read the story the same way you always read it. Same rhythm, same pauses. You go back to the table with the reports and the maps and the names. And you stay. You stay because the alternative is unacceptable. And in staying in the ordinary, unglamorous, unremarkable act of just continuing to show up, you give the people who depend on you the only thing that actually matters. The certainty that there is someone between them and the dark who will not move.